Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. My name is Brad Rowland. This is episode 1183 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. For the first time, we're actually doing this on video as well. And to commemorate this fine edition, I am joined by Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good, Brad. How you doing?
I'm glorious. My apologies to everyone that's both watching on YouTube and also listening to this podcast. This is the first one of these. I promise it will not be as clunky in the future, but I am trying to figure out this. I teased this earlier in the week and already have been begging for people to follow the YouTube channel. But basically, once this is up and running, nothing will be different other than you will be able to watch me if you'd like to on YouTube and also see Glenn's shining face on this episode.
Who wouldn't want that?
Exactly. With that out of the way, Glenn, number one, thank you for joining me. And number two, we should talk about some basketball because this is the All-Star break. It's kind of funny to be recording at this time. In fact, we're going to be recording this pretty much during the Rising Stars Challenge, and I know you're heartbroken by that.
That's happening right now? What are we doing? I have to stop. No, it's totally fine. I had no plan to take that in. If one of the Hawks were playing and if a Congu was playing, I'd probably watch it just out of a sense of duty, if nothing else. But I think I'm going to skip that one and get to start my break tonight.
Yeah, same. I would have been watching intently had a Congu been involved or anybody else on the Hawks roster. But for the purposes of this podcast, it's the All-Star break. And I want to talk about some recent stuff for the Hawks as well as some big picture stuff as well. You know, in the last week or so, they had a bad loss to San Antonio. They blew a winnable game in Boston. They were winning at halftime, etc. Then they had a kind of a pretty awesome win against Cleveland, and then a pretty sort of hold serve kind of win against Orlando. So a 2-2 week is kind of just fine. Could have been 3-1, maybe even 4-0 if things had gone differently. I'll ask you to, I guess, just in the narrow scope, what you saw in the last week, and then we can kind of zoom out from there.
Yeah, I mean, if we kind of work backwards, only in a sense that, I thought all the habits that we want to see from them showed up in the Orlando game. I thought all the defensive habits were there. And in a way that doesn't seem impressive because they're playing one of the worst teams in the league. But that's been the setting for when we've seen them kind of come in and sleepwalk through a game or, go through with 70% or 80% or whatever kind of number you want to apply there. And you just hope that stuff sticks. Going back to Cleveland, the big takeaway for me there was that when you play DeAndre Hunter at the 4, it's hard to put him on Darius Garland in that game. They didn't really have another solution there. That's one of the impacts of them not having found a deal to make it the deadline that might have added some more depth on the wing, but they produced enough offense in that game. Obviously, that's their forte. To get that win, they kind of stuck together, persevered through moments of adversity there, which is good. They haven't always done that this season, and I thought that was an important win. I felt like I'm missing one. The Boston game, if I'm going the reverse order the right way.
Yeah.
I think the Boston's defense is the best in the league right now, and I thought they just kind of took everything the Hawks really wanted to do in terms of their primary stuff on offense kind of away from them, and the Hawks just couldn't generate enough offense there. I thought they played B-plus defense in that game. Maybe that third quarter side where Boston put up 42, and then the Spurs, I thought that was maybe the one game where that's the greatest example of them coming in and kind of taking a game for granted. And, I know the Spurs record is not super impressive, but, do the Hawks know what their record is? And on top of that, the Spurs are a very professional team. They're going to come at you with effort, and they're going to try to play kind of to their own standards in terms of getting into the things that they're trying to do. And they just outplayed the Hawks. And sure, DeJounte Murray probably had one of his best games of the season, but it's not like that came out of nowhere. The guy's an all-star. He's a legitimate all-star. And they just kind of looked like a team that felt like the win was going to come fairly easily there, and it didn't. So I thought the last 4 games was kind of a decent kind of sampler of what we had all year long, where sometimes it's like, where's the focus? Where's the energy? And other times like, okay, here are all the habits that we want to see. going forward, what are we going to get? Which version of these Hawks teams we've seen even in the last 4 games are we going to get going forward? I think that's going to dictate a lot of the outcome of the season for them.
I totally agree. In fact, in my notes, I think I had the word microcosm written down of the season on the whole, because all the way down to being 500 in that period of time. This is basically a 500 team right now. I think they're better than that. I think you may think that as well, but at the same time, that's what they've been to this point. They're even below 500 at this stage, and the offense was ridiculous in the last 2 games. They had a 130 offensive rating in a two-game sample. And yeah, one of those games was Orlando, one of them was Cleveland, and that's a top 5 defense team in the league. They went out and lit them up, and they shot the heck out of the ball. They took care of the ball. They had 2.2 assists per turnover in those 2 games. And defensively, like you said, it's a mixed bag. I think it's been a little bit better in recent days on the whole compared to previous, when it was really ugly at times early in the season. But even against Orlando, they were just okay, I thought, defensively, especially when you adjust for the curve that is the Orlando Magic offense, which is not the best unit in the world. So, I mean, I can sort of day by day, hour by hour, train myself to find the positives. I saw you had some great clips on Jalen Johnson. I was going to ask you about and stuff like that. You could find some encouraging stuff in that film, particularly on the offensive end the last couple games. But in general, the questions I have are kind of still the same questions, whether it be focus, whether it be just consistency. And then, I think it probably feels better for them to close 2-0 than it would have been. This is a 2-2 stretch over 4 games. I guess it might have felt better because of the All-Star break to almost lose the first 2, win the last 2, because then at least you're riding high as you go into the break, a little bit of momentum, all that stuff, if you believe in that kind of thing. I'm not sure where I stand on that, to be honest with you, but the vibes were pretty good after the game on Wednesday, which is a small thing, but also could be meaningful. So I guess I was going to ask you about the defense. Let's talk about that for a second as well. What do you make of the defense right now? It's a very broad question, but you talked about Hunter not being able to do all things. People asking me too that same night about why he wasn't defending Garland. And it's well, he's playing the 4 for 20 minutes.
Right.
You can't really have your power forward guard Darius Garland for most of the game. The matchups don't really work that way. But at the same time, I think the solutions, and rightly so in some respects, are all right, Hunter's back, so defense is going to be better now. And it has been on some level, but he can't fix every problem. So I'm wondering what you think about the defense overall right now, because the numbers are what they are. They're a bottom 5 defense for the season, but they probably should be a little bit better than that.
Yeah, and I think when I get asked a question like this, I always want to remind myself that they don't necessarily need to be a top 10 defense to kind of hit the mark for the goals they have for this year. They're that good offensively. I do think they're maybe it's one manifestation of Cam Reddish not working out for this year and not still being on the roster, in terms of maybe looking at him as a guy who could handle 12 to 15 minutes of some sort of primary assignment on defense. That's gone. That didn't, I don't want to talk like that was there up until the trade. It wasn't. It just didn't kind of manifest this year and work out. And I'm sure that was a factor in them deciding to kind of finally pull the trigger on that. But right now, when you look at your defensive wings, you really have Hunter and Herter. Trey is either going to bring enough effort to kind of make enough impact on that end or not. He doesn't have the kind of the physical profile and the athletic profile you're looking for. And he does enough on offense that I think that's totally workable. Clint and Okongwu I think should be one of the best kind of first and second line bigs that a team could have in the league. That's not statistically turning into the results they want. And so to me, it really comes down to kind of, can they defend at the point of attack? Can they pressure the ball? And that's been 2 major issues, probably the biggest areas of concern for them across the whole season. And what they have to work with right now is a bogey that's looked a little better defensively of recent, but it's really Hunter and Herter. And in my mind, Hunter is better on ball, kind of chasing guys over ball screens, getting into the ball handler. Herter to me is still a guy that's better off ball, chasing a Seth Curry type or a Joe Harris type of those, those guys over those off ball screens, whether the flare screens or whatever. He's not so impactful, right on ball, kind of chasing, primaries over ball screens. And so that, in terms of a configuration that's going to work in the starting lineup, that's the way you continue to go with the starting lineup. That's probably what you're set up with. But when either one of those guys goes to the bench, you start really losing what a little bit you have to work with at the point of attack. And we've, you and I and others have kind of talked all season long when fans have been frustrated with Capella, if you're not strong at the point of attack, I don't care if you have the greatest center in the defensive center in the history of the league. You take an NBA primary getting downhill to the paint, having had no resistance at the point of attack, no one's going to be able to do anything once that person gets there. And that's kind of been what we've seen Capella and Okongwu deal with all year long. So the weapons are what they are. I know we're going to talk about JC here in a little bit, but if one of the solutions to kind of covering those minutes is to slide Hunter to the 4, then you're going to ask Herter to be the guy who's primarily that on-ball defender, taking that primary. And while he was a really impactful defender in the playoffs last year, I don't think that's who you're going to get 82 games a season. Like I said, he's much, much better doing things like top blocking or, heading off ball screens and things like that. So Nate's got to find a way to make the Hunter plus Herter situation work. Behind those guys, I don't know, does Knox get some minutes because of his defense? His offense has been terrible. And that's
accurate.
And it makes it hard to maximize what you're trying to do with Trey on the offensive end and things like that. So it's difficult, but I think Trey is what he is. The center play should be easily good enough, and one of the best first and second line tandems in the league. It's how do you get what you have at the wing to work? How do you generate enough point of attack defense? How do you generate enough ball pressure? And that's what it's going to kind of come down to. They can kind of push toward being something closer to an average defense rather than above 5 defense.
Yeah, you kind of did the tease for me because you're a pro, Glenn. But before I ask you about John Collins and some other stuff, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today. Football is over for a while. Basketball is still running full steam in both pro and college hoops, and with all the latest odds, totals, player props, futures, and more, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. Beyond that, BetOnline remains the best spot for all of the sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And of course, it's not just basketball, even if we love basketball in this space. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, for boxing, UFC, MMA, auto racing, golf, tennis, soccer, horse racing, and everything else you can possibly think of. All the odds for all of that, plus Olympic coverage and information that you need right now. Head to the BetOnline website right now or use a mobile device to learn all about the trends and the action and all the odds that are available to you today. Check it out at betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Glenn, I want to key in on this, and I want to stress this now as sort of a disclaimer. We do not know that Collins is going to be out. In fact, he could play on Thursday, and I'm not saying otherwise. I want to repeat that one more time. John Collins could be back on Thursday as the Hawks return, but there's a chance he's not. They were pretty vague with their description about his foot issue that he has. He left that Spurs game early, and I know you watched the tape, Glenn. Anybody who watched that tape knows that he was not himself that night. He could not really push off, couldn't really run, and then missed the last 3 games. They clearly could have used him against Boston. That's a matchup that he's had some success in. Obviously, he's good in a lot of matchups, but it was pretty glaring to me that night that they could have used him. But regardless, they've been pretty bad defensively on the whole, of course, but they've been much worse when he's not played. In fact, Clean the Glass has the Hawks with a 116 defensive rating anytime Collins is off the court this year. That's a terrible number, just for everybody to realize. That's a worst in the league kind of number. It's not always him, but they've been pretty bad with Hunter at the 4 this season in terms of the numbers. And really, anytime Collins is off the floor, it's not great, but especially when you're trying to play small, it's a small sample size for sure. But essentially, my question, and I'll let you go wherever you want with this, is like, what happens if Collins isn't back right away? And like, we saw what they did. We kind of know what they did. They played Hunter as the backup 4, and it was 48 minutes of Gallo or Hunter at the 4. And Nate kind of mentioned 2 different times they might play the 2 bigs and never did it. And then we saw when they were up by 25 on Wednesday, they went to Knox in kind of rotation minutes for like 5 minutes, and that was it. So let's say, just for the hypothetical, let's say Collins misses 2 more weeks. What would you want to do? What would you want to see if they didn't have Collins for enough time? Just because clearly it's a gaping hole, but nothing, they can't really fix it now in terms of the roster. So like, they have to do what they have to do.
Yeah, and I think if they, let's say even had 3 or 4 more wins than they have now, they might have the tolerance to try to integrate Jalen and get some minutes from him as a 4. And I know that
the desperation levels there, though. I mean, people always ask. I know people. I'm not trying to cut you off, but people always ask all of us about why Jalen's not playing.
Right.
And I think what you just said is at least part of it. Now, part of it's Nate being stubborn, Nate being Nate, all that stuff.
Right.
But it's a lot harder to do when they're all saying it. It's not just Nate, even the players.
Right.
They got to win. They feel like they got to win every night, and it's really hard to do that with Joe Johnson.
Yeah, they need to take their best shot every single game the rest of the way, and that's going to make it hard to kind of get anything from Jalen. Now, I know that I thought it was only fair for me to put out some examples of the good work he did in the last 6 minutes or so over the Orlando game, especially as a help defender, being in the right spot, showing up on time, and visibly being able to tell that he was anticipating where he needed to be, which is good because it wasn't like, oh no, I got to get over here now. He was early, and detecting where he needed to be, where he would need to move next as a help defender. Now, they put him into a pick and roll one time, and it was a debacle. So it's one possession, so you don't want to.
It was also kind of garbage timey too. So like, I can see why people might have seen your clips and been like, well, this game is over. Like, how much does it matter? But because it's you, I knew right away, like, you're not going to pull stuff that's misleading. Like, it's not going to be like, oh, Jalen had a nice crossover move with 4 minutes to go in this garbage time game. It's real stuff that he was doing defensively, which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's well put. But that the pick and roll, like he didn't communicate. He didn't really. It was kind of in traffic. It was a kind of a weird setup. It wasn't a super high kind of in space pick and roll, and he cleared out before there was any plan to contain the ball at all. And so when I saw that play, I thought, great that off the ball he's like knows what's coming. He knows where to be. He knows where to move. He's ready to move. That is a massive step forward from where he was a month or 2 months ago, or how far back we want to go. If he were to play actual minutes, there is the risk of that the other team would just put him in the pick and roll, especially if he's playing the 4. It's pretty easy to either involve the other team to involve their 5 or their 4 in the pick and roll, and I think that would be really problematic. It's which is for where he is, that's fine. That's not a Jalen issue. That's an issue of the Hawks not necessarily have a solution. It's probably premature to jump into it, but I wonder if they might sign someone. It made no sense to try to get someone on a 10-day heading right to the All-Star break. That just doesn't make any sense at all. But when I think about who they're playing coming out of the break, they got, I think, 2 with Chicago, 1 with Toronto. They got Milwaukee, a little like game 6 or 7, somewhere in that range. But especially those Chicago matchups, you're going to need Hunter on either DeRozan or Levine that whole game, and you're not going to want to play him at the 4. So I'm not sure what they're going to do in that situation. But in my mind, as I kind of look at the schedule coming out of the break, getting more Hunter minutes at the 4 doesn't seem that reasonable to me right now. So there's a massive hole there. I don't know if they can go out and kind of find a veteran that's available that they could kind of slide in that they would trust or not. Right now, I'll be honest with you, I'm I'm a happy kind of optimistic person. I don't see the solution that makes me feel great right now. If JC
not without
a
Collins.
Couple weeks, right?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I can maybe recommend things, but yeah, it has to be noted that there are no great solutions if Collins were to miss more time. And again, I'm not saying he's going to, but they were as vague as they possibly could have been about their update. So who knows? But I think Knox has a reasonably high floor on defense just because he has been around for a long time. He's big, he's strong, he's athletic. He's not great, but he's in the time that he's played for the Hawks this season, I think you may agree or may not. I think he's been fine on defense, if not better than that.
For sure.
It's the offense. But knowing Nate, he might just default to like, look, we'll let other guys carry the offense. If I could just put somebody out there that can guard somebody, he might do that. Also this, you would think post a break, quote unquote, that it would be a good time to go to Jalen Johnson, but they're not practicing. It's not like they're practicing this week. It'd be different if they had an 8-day window to practice and then you go to Jalen Johnson. That would actually make a lot of sense in some ways, but they're only going to have a practice or 2 before they restart again. It's like these guys are all on vacation right now, or they're in Cleveland, one of the 2. So there's no great solutions. I do wonder, like, let's just say against Milwaukee, maybe they try Kongwu with the 4. Maybe they do it against somebody else. He's kind of flirted with it twice now in public sentiment. And I always, after the first time, I made sure, and I wasn't trying to pour water on it, but I was like, guys, he said this the other day too, and he didn't do it. So I think it has to be a very particular matchup, and it's because of the offense, not the defense. That's kind of a misconception people have. Nate's not worried about playing Okongwu and Capella together on defense because Okongwu's a monster on defense. He can fly around the perimeter, have Capella do what he does. It's the offense. It's having those two non-shooters out there. And yeah, maybe you get away with it if you're playing Trey, Herter, and Bogdanovic, and you have all this shooting on the perimeter. But if you try to play those guys with DeLon Wright or try to play those guys with, whoever, it's not the greatest offensive setup if you have those two guys. And I think eventually Okongwu will be able to shoot, but he can't now. So you have these two guys, and one of them's going to be in the dunker spot. It's just not ideal. So I think he might have to try it at some point just because there's not another option. And of course, the best case scenario is Collins plays on Thursday, and this is all moot. But I'm a little worried. I would say, in particular, the Milwaukee matchup and you mentioned the Chicago matchup. I totally agree with you. Like Toronto, you can get away with it. You've kind of seen it before. They play so not small, but they play so flat. Like they have all these 6'8" guys. It's not the worst time in the world to be playing Hunter at the 4. He can guard Siakam and do what he does. But against LaVine and DeRozan, like you could probably put Herter on LaVine and Hunter on DeRozan, but then you have some other issues on the back line. So I'm sure this doesn't make people feel any better, Glenn, to be honest with you. But it's not a great situation without Collins. And that's why, and this isn't always why Collins is valuable, but it is a reminder, let's just say, of how much they need him in the current iteration, because you're talking about guys like off the street to come in and help you. Like, yeah, I think Wes Iwundu might actually help them, but he's more of a 3 anyway. He's not this huge like power forward size guy. Like he's familiar, he's been around, but the buyout market, pick your guy. Number one, they have to want to come to Atlanta, and by the way, an Atlanta team that's under 500. We might think more of the Hawks than that, but the reality is, at the All-Star break, they're 28-30, and if you're player X and you have other offers, you may not want to choose the Hawks. So I don't know. It's not the most rosy segment in the world, but I'm a little worried if Collins can't play, just for obvious reasons.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like I have to say, like, I'm not sure what TLC status is because he played some 4 earlier in the year.
I feel like Knox is ahead of TLC in the pecking order if they go deeper into the bench, because TLC's not a 4 either. I think we know this, but just to be clear, he's not a 4. He's really a combo 2-3. He's not the biggest guy in the world. It's just that he's a vet, and Nate would trust him more to execute than other guys, maybe. Yeah,
totally agreed. And I don't know if Knox has been ahead of TLC because Knox is new and they just kind of see what they have.
Maybe
if they have a chance to add 2 bodies, for example, that they think can help on the stretch drive, I think they've had to figure out is Knox worth the roster spot he has.
There's some evaluation here for sure,
right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that they have an idea what they have in TLC. He got plenty of run earlier in the season, so that's the thing. But yeah, I mean, I wonder if a guy like Wyndon Gabriel could kind of come in and help them at that spot. He's bigger than an Iwundu. He's an actual 4. He has some size there, and he has a decent amount of experience. There's a few other guys kind of bouncing around like that, but he's the one that kind of jumps out to me as
he's with Wisconsin right now in the G League. I think I'm looking this up now as we're talking, but yes,
that sounds right. Yeah,
he's an NBA player that's a power forward, which is
he is, and he can do. I mean, most importantly to me is he can do the things that the Hawks need their power forwards to do. He can move. He can do make an impact inside. He can work just like JC has to do, sometimes rush out and close out on a stretch 4. And he has that length and kind of enough strength and size inside, and enough athletic ability to kind of get out there. And he's I think a 37% 3-point shooter in his career. Obviously, there's not a million shots, but I've seen him play multiple years in summer league, and he looks like a guy who I would trust to put up corner threes if the other team's just going to completely ignore him. So we probably already spent too much time on him because we have no idea if there's any mutual interest there at all. But that's the kind of guy that they could possibly get on a 10-day, depending on how he would feel about that and stuff. So, but we'll have to see. If they're not going to go that direction coming out of the break, there might be a shift. Like we might see more TLC. They might have decided, okay, we've seen enough of Knox that we're going to go in a different direction. But it's tricky. It's really tricky, and I another impact is that playing Gallo as a starter really kind of reshuffles your second unit offense a decent amount too. So you're giving some things back elsewhere too when you kind of make that shift. So It's tough. I have a hard time imagining what Capella plus Okongwu on offense would look like in terms of what the Hawks do. They might be able to find enough things to kind of give them 4 minutes a half, which could be really valuable if they could find a way to kind of make that work. But the fact that neither of them are shooters at all, just like you said a few minutes ago, that's pretty tricky. So
you can muck it up there a little bit if you want to. Just try to play really slow. Like there was a time when they were maybe even under Lloyd where it was very obvious that they were just trying to play as slow as humanly possible when Trey left the floor because they knew they couldn't score. Right. And it would almost be like that again, where like you're almost tempted to just like put the lawn out there with them too, and just like kind of just grind the game to an absolute halt, try to get stops and just escape dead even. I don't know what you do there with those two guys, but it'd be interesting. Yeah. That's for sure. I have more positive things to ask you about in a second, but first, one more word to hear from our sponsors. This is usually the time of year where I pretty much give up on all my resolutions for the new year, but this year I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right with a hat tip to Built Bar. Honestly, it feels like it's not really a resolution anymore because I enjoy eating Built Bars, from the protein-infused puff bars. They're fantastic. To all the other fan favorites from Built Bar. Each and every Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate, which makes a huge difference, and they taste fantastic. On top of the taste, though, Built Bars have low calorie counts, and they have high protein, and you can easily replace your candy bars with Built Bars both in taste and to improve your nutrition. If you go to Built.com, check out the nutrition page. You'll be blown away with most Built Bars containing only 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein with a low calorie count. In terms of flavor, Built Bar has some of the favorites like coconut almond and mint brownie, and also a new flavor this month, and it's white chocolate cookies and cream, which is absolutely fantastic. Each flavor is delicious, and they have new flavors coming all the time. The best way to check out Built Bar, though, is to check out Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15. If you do that, you get 15% off your order with Built Bar. That is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, Glenn, I want to ask you about a more positive story, and that is Bogdanovic's bounce back development here. He's been back since January 26th, so only like 3 weeks or so of basketball, but he's averaging 16, 4, and 4 in about 29 minutes a game. His shooting is back up to where it was, not quite the second half of last year when it was absolutely ridiculous, like when he shot 50% from 3. But basically what I would say is that he's back to his old self. Not necessarily all the way to all-star bogey from the second half of last season, but back to what you would think you're going to get from Bogdanovic is the way that I've been saying it. First, do you agree with that? And second, like how big is it to have him with more juice? Because I think he's clearly been a different player since he came back.
Yeah, I think it's massive, and especially if he's embracing playing on the second unit, if that's the direction they continue to go. I think kind of, setting aside even his wonderful shooting and the self-creation that he's kind of been demonstrating of recent, I think he's been leading by example. Like even on defense, like when you see a guy on time helping at the nail, showing up with a dig, stunting help down into someone in the. He's been I think the most consistently active and helpful defender, even if he's not the most naturally gifted guy. On that end, we know he's kind of strong and he has good solid size for the position. But just in terms of his ability to kind of change directions and move laterally and things like that. So I've been appreciative of what he's kind of just shown as a guy demonstrating effort, habits, engagement, communication on the defensive end as well. He's been impactful on that end more than what you'd normally expect. On offense, to take shots, his ability to kind of use a single dribble, whether he's, they've ran more, for example, more floppy the last couple games, which is good. I think that's better for all of Hunter, Herter, and Bogdanovic, but especially Bogdanovic, and that's helped him get to some of his shots more. So, the Hawks, some of their uglier fourth quarter stretches have been when they can't get a bucket because they know they can't just go get a stop whenever they're not good enough on defense to go, we're just going to go get a stop. They have to, play their best and still kind of hope for a missed shot or what have you. But every shot, like in the fourth quarter, Bogdanovic makes, I think, is just alleviates so much pressure from them and how they're playing in other areas. And I just think it's just massive. And if he were still playing the way he was playing, either just the last few games before or the last few games after coming off of that break for the knee issue, I would be really worried about the Hawks trying to finish in that 7-8 spot, so they at least have a little more favorable, kind of spot in the play-in and all that sort of stuff. But he really has brought a lot recently, and if he can bring that the rest of the way, I think that's going to help them, be a truly kind of top 3 offense in the league, which makes if they get to 19th, 20th on defense the rest of the way, that should set them up to win a lot of games. If they didn't have that, I think it would just be that much more pressure on Trey, that much more pressure on every shot someone takes from the 3-point line in the fourth quarter. And you could tell when teams are feeling that, the Bogey has taken a lot of pressure off of them with the way he's played recently. And it's been a massive difference to me.
Totally agree. And I think that we won't do this the whole thing again, but having to start Gallo, it's a little bit easier when Bogey's on the second unit and kind of leading that crew offensively. Like, yeah, Lou's gonna have the ball in his hands a lot too when he's playing, but Bogey having more juice helps you when you have to start Gallo, because like you said before, they have to alternate the rotation. Gallo is the source of their offense on the second unit a lot, and having Bogey there and being comfortable there and being aggressive there really helps you. And then at the end of games, like you just said, like a lot of times, for better or worse, it's if Trey doesn't have it at the end of games, they get really bogged down. And it's a very obvious statement. And it's not on Trey. It's just that when he doesn't have it, and that's not more times than not, he does. That's the positive thing, is that he's really good. But he's not in a groove, and teams are focused on him, and he is smartly going to give the ball up a little bit. You need other guys to be able to take advantage of that. And Bogey, I would say, is probably the most aggressive offensive player on the team outside of Trey in terms of hunting his own. And you need that sometimes. Like for all the talk, and we've all done it. You've done it. I've done it. Long-term stuff, especially, like the Hawks need a number 2 shot creator, is like one of those very popular things. And Bogey's not a star like that. But if it comes down to it, and you can't, if the answer is not Trey, Bogey's probably the second guy that's going to go get you a bucket at the end of a game on the perimeter. That's the reality of the situation. Like, Herter can do it for sure. If Lou's playing, he could do it too, but you want to play Lou and Trey together necessarily. Collins has some stuff and mismatches. Gallo, same thing. But if it's just like, simply put, it's probably Bogey if he's got it. And it just helps the team overall offensively when he is playing well. And on defense, like, I think we all noticed this, but he was really bad defensively early in the season. Like, he was pretty limited. And I've defended Bogey's defense in the past. I think he was, he gets a bad rap on some respects defensively, but his early season performance this year on defense was a big problem as well. And he's been better there. He's not, in my mind, been fantastic still, but he's been different in a positive way from early the season to the last couple of weeks on defense. And that helps you too, because you have to be able to try to alleviate those mistakes on that end of the floor. And to play him, which you need to do on offense, he's got to hold up on defense, because especially if you're trying to play that Herter, Bogdanovic, Trey lineup on the perimeter, which is your best offensive lineup, you got to stop somebody at some point. And Herter's been fine defensively, but he's not an elite guy. Trey is Trey. So Bogey just being okay is a big boost there.
Yeah, agreed. And I feel like it's important for me to say that when Herter is at the point in his career that Bogey is now, I think Herter will be a similar kind of player, more reliable as a creator, things like that. Bogey is just so experienced. I know it's only his, 5th season in the league, but he has so much international experience.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's a vet. He's a vet for a 5th-year guy for sure. He's more established.
And he's played in a lot of pressure pack situations, international play, and things like that. So that he certainly leans on that. And then I would also say, with Bogey on the second unit, the minutes he has when he's playing with a Kongwu, he's probably the best helper in the rebounding category of the wings that they have too. He's just really attentive to when, like, Capella or Kongwu has to step up and challenge a shot. He comes down and will help kind of at least take a body, try to find somebody to box out, and use his strength and what size he has to kind of help rebound. And that's big, especially when a Kongwu's on. And then when you don't have JC to pair there, and Gallo is struggles as a rebounder against athletic teams,
yes,
especially having that it makes a difference, and it's pretty big, and especially when we're kind of like unpacking everything, but like especially when you have difficulty at the point of attack that's going to draw the center into more shot contesting and helping on the ball handler. You need those wings to kind of be able to kind of step pinch down and help on the blocks, kind of rebound. And Bogey is just more focused, prioritizes it more, or is just capable of kind of seeing what is needed from him more than the others. And, aside from the foul issues that Congo has, the rebounding is the biggest, kind of challenge area that they have when he's at the 5. And so with Bogdanovic having minutes with him, that makes it, I think, more realistic they're going to hold up in that area, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not going to do this segment now, but we could sort of flog DeAndre Hunter for not rebounding, because he's going to have to get better at that too, because he's the guy you would imagine of the wings that would be eventually a good rebounder, but he's really not. Like, Bogey's a better rebounder than him right now. In fact, I would go as far as to say DeLon Wright is their best perimeter rebounder, pretty clearly, I think, which is, I mean, DeLon Wright plays point guard sometimes. He's probably their best rebounder on the perimeter. So
yeah, it's funny to think back to last year. Herter was really good in that area, and but I think a lot of the inconsistency in those areas comes down to so many different roles. Like, I was going to say, before the Cam trade, when Cam was available, when Cam wasn't available, when Hunter was available, when Hunter wasn't available. There's been so much shifting and things like that, because like last year, Hunter was a great rebounder. I know I put this on Twitter, but I think only 3 players in the playoffs last year had more block shots than Herter had.
He was flying. Yeah, you're right. It was crazy.
And I think we've seen only little bits of that this year, not the consistency he brought in the postseason last year. And if I had to kind of try to form maybe an educated guess around that, it's all the different roles he's been in. And they're starting on the second unit, defending the other team's primary. Now Hunter's back. You're kind of in a supporting role. And I think Herter's still a pretty young player. I think it's hard to kind of bring a consistent visualization of how you're going to impact the game on defense game to game when it feels like it's different every week to week, if not game to game in some cases. That's challenging. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And we'll leave this topic, but I think also for Herter in particular, when Hunter is not out there, or when Hunter is unavailable or whatever, him having to be the unquestioned number 1 on the perimeter on defense, it's a tough ask for him. Like, we both think he's pretty solid on defense. He's not a bad defender, but he'll look like one. If he's got to guard Jason Tatum, he's not going to look like he's a good defender, because Jason Tatum is 2 inches bigger and 40 pounds heavier, and it's not going to work. Or if you're having Kevin Herter guard Darius Garland, he's going to look bad, because Darius Garland is really good, and it's a tough assignment for Herter. But if he's more appropriately assigned to being the number 2 or number 3 guy, I mean, probably number 2 for the Hawks on the perimeter, he looks a lot more responsible and solid, and that's what he actually is. It's the problem is when you're asking to be the number 1 stopper on the perimeter, that's where you get yourself in trouble. So
yeah, and I mean, I know you know this, but the best NBA teams have roster constructions that puts guys into roles that set them up for success. When you're in a situation where you're constantly trying to kind of scatter and move guys into other roles because of injuries or whatever the situation is, it's hard. But it's kind of funny to think about how we were all touting the depth of the roster coming into the season, and which was I think not baseless, but now we're seeing the depth you have to have, not just in terms of talent and competent rotational players, but guys that can step up into a specific role when there's that gap. The Hawks don't have that right now in terms of at the wing positions on defense the way that they need to, and it's really holding them back. So they're not going to be able to obviously make a trade this year. So any kind of change will be sort of in the margins, I guess. But I presume we'll be talking about this whenever their season ends, about what they need to do for next year, and put a pin in that one, as they say, right?
Yeah, it's going to happen, and yeah, I still think coming into the season it was totally reasonable to say the Hawks had good depth, because
agreed,
especially when you think about they had Cam, who they were banking on to be better than he was, and then that didn't work out, all that stuff. Yes, they brought in a player to replace him and Kevin Knox in the trade, but not the same thing in terms of what they were hoping for from Cam this year. And then you throw in the other injuries and stuff, and that's how you get your rotation not looking so deep. I mean,
if Solomon Hill hadn't gotten hurt
Exactly. I mean,
he would be
if they
playing
had
at the 4
Solomon Hill
right
right now, exactly. Yes.
Right.
If they had Solomon Hill, and that it sounds crazy, but because it's me and you, Glenn, this is an appropriate topic for us. But if Solomon Hill was on this team, he would have been playing considerable minutes for a large portion of this season. When Hunter was out, he would have played 20 minutes a night. When JC was out the last few games, he would have been playing 20 minutes a night, and that would have helped them. Solomon Hill's not a star. Even you and I are not calling him a star, but he would have been very, very, very useful. And a guy that, when we talked about earlier, without Collins, the answer would have been they're going to play Solomon Hill 20 minutes a game or 25 minutes a game.
Right.
And now they don't have that guy.
And I remind listeners and viewers, I guess, he played a ton last year. He played a ton.
He played way more than they wanted him to, way more than they wanted him to play, which is, I mean, that happens sometimes. But even we are two members of the Solomon Hill fan club. He played a lot more than he was supposed to play last year.
Right.
But having that malleability and that guy that Nate trusted and the guy that will just guard, that gives you some floor. Tony Snell was the same. I mean, not always the same thing. And Solomon Hill played a lot more. But having two of those guys who they trusted to just go out and not kill them, it's not a small thing, man. It matters. Like They don't have that now.
Right, and this is an opportunity, I think, to kind of highlight too that I think a lot of fans maybe struggle, understandably, with like, if you could go get like a Cam Reddish type, say, as a restricted free agent on a modest deal, in the future, or a guy who could be, you get for a modest trade or whatever, or you could put a Tony Snell or a Solomon Hill on your team. Like, why would you even think about it? And the reality is that when you get Solomon Hill and Tony Snell, you have guys that if they don't play for a month, they're fine. They're not going to create any issues at all whatsoever. They know what they are. They know what they bring to their team. They know that they're going to at times be asked to play when there's an injury or foul issues or back to back or whatever. And other times they may go a long time before they see rotational minutes. A guy like Cam Reddish, and I don't want to just pick on Cam, but other guys like that in the league who are still trying to get established, who are trying to earn their first really big payday in the league, are going to see that situation differently. And I think that's understandable, and I get it, But like, why do teams want to go out and get these, quote, veteran retreads? It's because these guys are professional. They do all the basic things competently. And if they don't play, they're going to be professional. They're still going to show up, work hard, contribute to the team, root their guys on, help their guys. And that makes a big difference across the season, where, say, a third-year guy who's kind of been bouncing around is going to come in and think, I need to play. And he's not wrong. So it's a differentiation that I think sometimes gets lost in conversations about what teams do with their 13th, 14th, 15th roster spot.
No, you're right. And one funny update on the Tony Snell front, he still has not missed a free throw. Just for the record, I know Hawks fans probably have stopped following Tony Snell, but he's not missed a free throw in 3 years, which is just insane. All right, before I let you get out of here, Glenn, I have to ask you. You sort of got into it a little bit earlier about the upcoming schedule, but it's kind of dicey the next couple weeks. Right. They only have 2 home games in the first 7. They go to Chicago on Thursday. Then they have Toronto at home, and Toronto just beat them twice. They go back to Boston. That's a tough game, obviously, and then Chicago at home again. After that, they have 2 pretty winnable road games in Washington and Detroit, but they're still road games. And then they go to Milwaukee. So they'll probably be favored in, I would say, maybe 3 out of the next 7 games. That doesn't matter necessarily, quote unquote matter, but it does kind of outline how difficult that little run is. And as we discussed earlier, the margin for error is extremely small for this team now. I guess I'll say this. I mean, what are you looking for as they come out of the break? And we talked about Collins not being there or whatever, but just broadly speaking and just the schedule, because they got to start stacking wins. That's the reality. Like, they know it. They've talked about it, but the slow start dug them a hole that no matter what the metrics say, no matter what you and I think about their team quality, they have to start winning and winning now.
Yeah, to me, it starts with giving yourself a chance to win every game. So not showing up for any game and not having good habits on defense and not being invested in kind of, getting back, walling off and transition. I could give you a whole list of kind of things that they do. And they haven't done that enough consistently. And so to me, it kind of starts with that. If you're going to, give yourself a chance to win, one or both of those Chicago games, it's going to be being trying to produce enough offense as a top and be able to do that. So, but if you're getting distracted by the officiating, as Nate will talk about. And I'm guilty. I get distracted by the officiating a lot.
I see that in Slack sometimes too,
and it's on Twitter as well. Yeah, and stuff. But it really is kind of starts with like giving yourself a chance by doing all the fundamental things on defense that you need to do, and then not allowing another team to kind of draw you into that slow attack of the mismatch, as I call it. But it really is about kind of give yourself a chance to win. If they split with Chicago, I think that's a good outcome for them.
Yeah. That
Toronto game to me is massive because if they have any shot of getting to 6, they're going to have to get past Toronto to get there. And I know that Toronto's not in the top 6 right now, so I'm not.
Yeah, they're only a half game out. They're only a half game out there. They're 7th, and that's one thing I've been stressing too. Is like it's easy to look at like, okay, right now Boston is number 6, and the Hawks are 5 games behind Boston. But you have to remember they have to climb over 3 more teams before they get to Boston. Right. It's not like you have to just beat one team, and that's why it's so unlikely if you look at the models that the Hawks would be in the top 6. Right. Is that even if they went out and went, I don't know, 19-5. In the last 24 games, that might not be enough because you got 4 teams ahead of you. And if somebody else goes 17-7, you don't get there.
Right. And I haven't done the math, but 19-5 gets you to like 50-50. I don't know, probably something like that.
For the top 6, yeah. I mean, I think it would almost be probably worse than that. I mean, there's a reason. I think Basketball Reference. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. They have the Hawks with a 1.9% chance to get in the top 6, and I think it's probably higher than that, but it's not more than 10%. I can tell you that right now. And that's with someone who I'm high on the Hawks, what they can do. But yeah, like even if you assume they go on a run that they have not flashed this season, like 19-5 is not a run that they've showed that they can have this season so far. Even if they did that, I would pick them to probably not make the top 6, which is crazy. But that's you're behind 4 teams. So you're behind 5 teams. You got to pass a bunch of teams.
Yeah. A team ahead of them is going to have to run into some real difficulty, more difficulty than you would kind of expect. Like, I think Toronto is a solid team, but as Kevin and I have talked about on Kevin's podcast, our podcast, I guess he wants me to call it.
Who's Kevin?
I know, but they're playing like 7 guys. And now Fred VanVleet has hurt. You wonder if like all the minutes have kind of factored into that hamstring issue he has now and stuff. So and I'm not wishing for, I don't ever wish for anyone to fail. That's just not a thing I do. But if you're trying to look at what could happen, knock on wood, I don't want Embiid to get hurt. He's having just an amazing season. I want to keep watching that. How he and Harden integrate, but could Philly fall that far? That seems pretty unlikely.
Right? I mean, it's 7 games,
right?
And that's, I mean, let's say just for the heck of it, they hit an obstacle, whether it be an Embiid injury or a Harden injury or whatever. You're 7 games back with 24 to play. Like, it's really hard to say that's going to be overcomable. So I think the clearest path for the Hawks, and I wonder if you agree, is basically to get to the 8 spot. That's what you want to do at this point. That'd be my more realistic goal. We get to 8, avoid that 9-10 game. But even, by the way, sneakily, even then, getting to 8 is pretty difficult, especially if Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant and is playing, because the Nets are 8 right now. They're 2.5 games ahead of the Hawks. Without Durant, as we've seen the last month, they're pretty bad without Durant, to be honest with you. But then if you throw in Durant and whatever you get for Ben Simmons, that's a whole other thing that we won't do now. But if they have Durant, they're the favorite over the Hawks with a 2.5 game lead.
Right.
And then I would pick the Hawks to finish ahead of Charlotte. If they're tied with the Hornets right now, I would have the Hawks in that head-to-head. But that only gets you to 9. And 9's better than 10, but you still got to win. You still got to win twice to get into the playoffs.
You do. So I would think that the way they talk about it is we're still aiming for 6. We're going to set our sights high. We're going to have that I would call it a stretch goal at this point. They may not use that word.
Sure.
But still, like if the door opens, we're getting in. We're going to play well enough. We're going to play hard enough, and we're going to play with all the focus and the fundamentals that we need to get there if the door opens. And if we fall short, then we're going to land 7th, 8th. That's advantageous, for us if we're going to play in to land in one of those 2 spots. And that's just how it's going to go. Zooming out, you hope that there's a lesson for this still, fairly young team that, you got to take and just listen to Clint. like we can't take games for granted. We can't just assume we're going to be in the playoffs. We're not going to, you just can't do those things.
Bogey said it too. The veterans, the guys who've been through more stuff have been saying it all year. Bogey said it in training camp. You remember this? Bogey came out in training camp and was like, "We got to forget we were in the playoffs last year." And people were like,
Right.
"Wait, what?" And he's like, "It doesn't matter anymore." And he was right, but they clearly didn't buy into that necessarily. At least not top to bottom.
And then Clint, I mean, I still think it's a huge factor that Clint was in Houston when they went from kind of trying to be really relevant to becoming really relevant, and seeing that, one of the factors of what they did was the professionalism and the focus game in, game out of what those veterans in Houston always brought. Trey doesn't have the experience that Capella brings. Trey doesn't have the experience that Bogey brings. And Trey being the best player, he's going to kind of set the example and be the de facto leader to a degree. But I hope that kind of the team consciousness is pulling in those experiences, those real lived experiences that those guys like Capella and Bogey have, and start realizing a random Thursday game or whatever it was against the Spurs, we got to go in and play hard, and we got to go in and
they can't
deserve.
lose that game. That was, I mean, you know me, I am not the guy that's like banging on the table about how this is. I don't use the word must win in the regular season really ever. And I was like, all right, this is the one they got to get. I mean, look at just going through the schedule and the standings. It's like, and to come out and lose that game, how they did. I mean, they were down 20 out of the gate and trailed the whole way and never really got close. And it was like, man, it's just one game. It's 1 out of 82, which if you're taking a big picture approach, which I kind of do, I would downplay the severity of that performance. But given what they had done to that point, to come out and lose that one at home the way they did was not a good result, let's just say. So, I don't want to go crazy with it, but that's a good example. And the Spurs played great. They made a bunch of shots. Credit to them. But that's one you got to circle at the end of the season and be like, man, that's what we needed to get.
Yeah. And that's when they looked like a team that came in in third gear, telling themselves, if we need to get it to fourth gear, we'll put it in fourth gear. And all of a sudden you're down 20, 22 points, and you're like, do we need to get to fifth gear?
They had just waxed Indiana too earlier the week. They had 2 days off. They're looking at the Spurs. They had just made a trade. They don't have Derek White. They're looking at this team like, all right, we just killed the Pacers. And I would say, to the Hawks' credit, that Pacers game could have been a look ahead spot, because that Pacers team was a G League team that night. For sure. And to the Hawks' credit, they came out from the opening bell and just put them away. And that was good. And then they didn't do it. They didn't do it the second time. And the Spurs are better than that Pacers team were, but they were 8-point favorites for whatever it was, 9-point favorites in that game. And it's like, all right, you got to show up and win, play well.
Yeah. So
anyway,
to hit the mark the rest of the way, no more efforts like that. I mean,
you can't do
it. We've talked about the fact that the first game after the trade deadline is often a mulligan. Well, you know what? You'd use 5 mulligans before the point of the season. So
there's a bunch of games. Yeah, there's a bunch of games. Not I won't go through the entire schedule, but I'm just going to name a few games that are basically spots where the Hawks, I never use must win, but need to win. When they go to Detroit with 2 days rest on March 7th, it's a road game, but it's the Pistons. That's one you got to win. Indiana at home again on the 13th of March. That's a game you got to win. They go back to Detroit in March. That's the game you got to win. Indiana again. Oklahoma City on the road. Those are games that you cannot afford to lose. Houston in the season finale. It's on the road, but those are teams that are maybe not necessarily taking all of them, but they're all rebuilding, just to be kind. Those are games that when you need to go, 18-6 down the stretch to really do what you want to do, you cannot lose those games.
Yeah, and just go ask Boston if you have to take Detroit seriously.
They were up 8 with 4 minutes to go, and I missed it. I was recording a podcast, and I turned it on. I was like, "Wait, they lost." Okay,
I watched that. I've been watching more Celtics lately because I'm really fascinated to kind of see where their season goes from here. But Detroit just kept playing hard and just would not. They play hard.
Cade doesn't quit either. Cade plays hard.
Yeah, and Jeremy Grant was absolute monster down the stretch there. Sadiq Bey made a big shot, and so you want to treat the Pistons kind of like you did that Spurs game. You're gonna, so Hawks fans might laugh, haha, the Pistons. No, you might find yourself in a tie game with 3 minutes to go.
It's a road game too. Like I even said about Orlando. Like Orlando's not very good, and the Hawks beat them convincingly as they should. But any road game in the NBA, you can lose if you don't show up. You can lose.
Right.
There's nobody that's that bad. There's no process Sixers this year. I thought the Thunder might be that bad coming into the season, and they're not. They play good defense. They play hard. Like, they're not good, but they can beat you if you don't show up. And Detroit's a good example of that too. Orlando, maybe the worst team in the league at the moment, and even they have real talent. Like, their starting five they got some talent on that team. So
Right.
You can't sleepwalk.
You can't take shortcuts. You gotta do the stuff that you should bring every game, the fundamentals, the basics, all that stuff has to show up. You can't opt that stuff in halfway through the second quarter when you're down 12 points. That's not how the NBA works. And that's how they've been playing, too much of the seasons. That stuff's got to stop. And then maybe we'll have another kind of fun ascension from this team towards the end of the season. We'll see. I think you and I kind of agree that the capacity's there, but we'll see if they do the necessary things to put them in position to potentially do that again.
Definitely. They are capable of making the run that they need to make. It's just that we'll see if they actually do it. Glenn, I really, really, really appreciate you joining me on video for this foray into the new world that I now have to live in with YouTube, and also on the audio side. People listening to the podcast may not care about the video side, and that's okay. But thank you for doing this. Where can people find your work? I know you are always hard at work covering the Hawks.
Yeah, the writing I do, Peachtree Hoops. I tend to do one of the follows each weekend as much as I can, and such. And a couple times a month, I'll put out some sort of content that's not related to a specific game. And then on Twitter at Willis_Glenn, I tend to do some amount of breakdown after every Hawks game there. In the range of 12 to 14 plays or something like that. And such. So that's where to kind of find my content. I enjoy conversations on Twitter. I know not everyone kind of replies to everything that comes at them. If as long as it's not just like an outlier ridiculous take, I'll converse with you. So just
sure,
jump in and let's enjoy a conversation if you're up for that.
No, absolutely. And my strongest recommendation for both following Glenn, reading Glenn, checking out his breakdowns, I learned from Glenn. I'm not ashamed to say that. I say that all the time when I was working with you directly at Peachtree Hoops, and I'm still in that Slack channel. We talk all the time, and I appreciate all of your work as well. But yeah, I would say that even if I was on this podcast. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for all you're doing.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be the guinea pig here.
I appreciate that too. As for everybody else, please subscribe if you are watching this on YouTube, which is a crazy thing to say. Please subscribe on the YouTube channel. Even if you're not a huge YouTube consumer, if you're listening to this podcast on the audio feed, it would help me greatly if you subscribed on the YouTube channel. I've been told by the higher ups that is a big indicator. So that subscribe button is very important. Like the show as well. And also subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those places. I do appreciate it. Please follow Glenn. Follow me if you want to. And we'll see you next time.